Imagine this. It's autumn, 1714. A small group of families living on the Carolina coast, farmers, traders, craftsmen, are going about their daily lives. Then, one night, 42 men, women, and children simply vanish. No ransom, no bodies, no signs of a raid. Just, gone. For 3 centuries, their disappearance was one of the strangest mysteries in early American history. And what makes this story even more chilling is what witnesses reported. The pirate who took them wasn't looking for gold, or silver, or even their ships. No, he was selecting them. Carefully, patiently, like a doctor examining patients, or a farmer choosing animals for slaughter. That pirate was Captain Ezekiel Thorne. And his name is almost completely missing from history books, because the truth about him was buried on purpose. This is part 1 of the story of Captain Thorne, the surgeon pirate. The perfect disappearance. The Carolina coast in 1714 was no stranger to pirates. Most pirates wanted treasure, food, or prisoners they could sell. But witnesses to this event noticed something different. Thorne went person by person, checking their teeth, tapping their chests, even listening to their breathing. He wasn't stealing wealth, he was choosing people. Colonial records from Charleston, locked away for centuries, tell us this wasn't just another pirate raid. Authorities back then classified the incident, filed misleading reports, and told the families their loved ones had died in shipwrecks. For generations, nobody was allowed to know the truth. Who was Captain Ezekiel Thorne? Ezekiel Thorne wasn't born a pirate. He was born in London, sometime around 1675, to a family of modest merchants. By all accounts, he was intelligent, ambitious, and very well educated. Unlike most pirates, who grew up hard and desperate, Thorne actually had a future. As a young man, he became a surgeon's mate in the Royal Navy, a position that usually required connections or noble birth. But Thorne earned his spot through skill. And he quickly gained a reputation as a gifted surgeon. Medical journals from Portsmouth Naval Hospital praised his work. Officers described him as a man who could keep the dying alive when all hope was lost. In Britain's brutal Caribbean campaigns, where disease often killed more men than bullets, Thorne's techniques were nothing short of miraculous. But something changed. Somewhere in those tropical waters, the healer became something else. Something darker. The Carolina frontier. To understand why this disappearance was so terrifying, you need to picture Carolina in 1714. It was only 4 years since the colony had been taken under the British Crown. The settlements stretched along hundreds of miles of swampy, mosquito-ridden coastline. Most families lived in small villages, rough timber houses with oiled paper windows, scratching out a living from rice fields, sawmills, or fishing boats. Life was harsh. Disease was constant. Attacks from raiders, native war parties, and pirates were always a threat. Charleston, back then called Charlestown, was the capital. Behind its wooden walls lived about 3,000 people, merchants, craftsmen, government officials, and their families. But outside those walls, scattered along rivers and barrier islands, dozens of tiny communities survived with almost no protection. These weren't wealthy plantation barons with hundreds of enslaved workers. They were working families, people with maybe a few acres of cleared land, a saw, a hammer, and the desperate hope that hard work would feed their children. Ordinary lives, extraordinary fate. Among the 42 who vanished were people like Thomas and Margaret Pemberton. Thomas had been a ship carpenter in Devon, England. He moved to Carolina with dreams of running a sawmill. He and Margaret had already buried 2 of their 5 children. Disease was merciless in the colonies. But they carried on, hoping to build a future near the Ashley River. There was also Rebecca Hartwell, a widow in her 30s who ran a small trading post. Literate and resourceful, she taught local children to read and write, something rare in those days, especially for a woman on the frontier. These people weren't rich, they weren't powerful. They were ordinary colonists, trying to survive. And yet, they were handpicked by Captain Thorne for reasons no one could understand. A colony on edge. The timing of Thorne's arrival couldn't have been worse. Queen Anne's War had just ended. Thousands of sailors and soldiers were now unemployed, drifting along the coast. Many turned to piracy. It was the only way they knew how to live. The colonial government was weak. Governor Charles Craven commanded fewer than 50 regular soldiers. His navy was basically one armed sloop and a few borrowed merchant ships. He couldn't possibly patrol every inlet and hidden cove along the coast. So when Ezekiel Thorne's ship sailed into Carolina waters, nobody stopped him. And nobody was prepared for what he was about to do. The surgeon pirate. What made Thorne so dangerous wasn't just his skill with a sword or pistol, it was his knowledge. He wasn't just a pirate captain. He was a trained surgeon. Witnesses said he examined people with a cold, clinical detachment, the way a doctor checks a patient. But he wasn't healing them. He was selecting them. Why? That's the part that terrified colonial officials so much they buried the truth for centuries. Because Thorne's interest wasn't in money, or revenge, or power. His interest was in experiments. Secrets buried for centuries. For over 300 years, the fate of those 42 souls was hidden under layers of lies. Families were told they'd died in storms. Court records were sealed. Colonial archives locked away the details. But now, with archaeological discoveries in Cuban waters, decoded Spanish documents, and newly released British naval records, we're finally uncovering what really happened. And what those records reveal about Captain Ezekiel Thorne is more horrifying than any pirate story you've ever heard. Right finger. This was part 1 of the story of Captain Ezekiel Thorne. In part 2, we'll explore how a brilliant healer, praised for saving lives, became the surgeon pirate who turned human beings into test subjects. So if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because trust me, you'll want to follow this story all the way to the end. Sparkle's word count. Approximately 1050 fits your request for approximately 1000 words. Do you want me to continue writing part 2 in the same style right away, or would you prefer to review part 1 and suggest adjustments before I move forward with the rest of the series? Part 2. The Surgeon Pirate's Dark Selections. Hook. Picture this. You're living on a Carolina rice plantation in the fall of 1714. The air is heavy with fog rolling off the river. You expect the usual dangers: mosquitoes, disease, maybe a raid by Spanish raiders or rival tribes. But instead, strangers step silently from the mist. No cannon fire, no shouting, no looting, just silence. And at the center of it all, a tall man in a dark blue naval coat with brass buttons. He doesn't steal your gold or burn your home. Instead, he examines you, your teeth, your heartbeat, your posture, like a doctor in a sick room. That man was Captain Ezekiel Thorne. And this was no pirate raid. It was a selection. A surgeon turned pirate. British naval records from Portsmouth show that Ezekiel Thorne had once been a rising star. He served aboard HMS Defiance in the Caribbean Wars, fighting the French and Spanish. In just 4 years, he rose from surgeon's mate to full ship surgeon, a promotion that usually took decades. Commanders called him brilliant, calm under fire, innovative in filthy, cramped ship hospitals where most men died of infection. He saved lives others thought were lost. But even then, there were hints of something unsettling. Letters between officers, discovered centuries later, spoke of Thorne's obsession with wounds and death. He would volunteer for the ugliest cases, watching men bleed out while sketching their injuries with eerie fascination. One officer, Commander William Hayes, wrote in 1710, "Thorne could be the finest naval surgeon of his generation. But when he works, there is something in his eyes that chills my blood. He studies suffering the way other men study maps, as if pain and death were lands to be charted." This was the man who stepped onto Carolina soil in 1714. Willowbrook Plantation. The first disappearance happened on October 15, 1714, at Willowbrook Plantation, 20 miles north of Charlestown. It was a typical rice plantation, a raised main house to avoid flooding, outbuildings, slave cabins, and workshops. Samuel Hawthorne, its owner, employed indentured servants from Scotland, and he had recently bought enslaved Africans from a passing ship. That foggy morning, Overseer Jonathan Cray was checking the rice harvest when he heard low voices near the house. By the time he realized pirates had surrounded the plantation, it was too late. But this was no ordinary raid. Cray testified later. No cannon, no fire, no screams. They came silent as death itself. Thorne walked calmly from building to building with a small squad of armed men. They moved with military precision, speaking in low tones, following a plan that had clearly been drawn up in advance. Thorne carried a leather-bound journal and made notes on each person. He released the elderly. He dismissed the sick. Children under 16 were sent back to their quarters. But strong adults between 20 and 40. They were examined like specimens. Cray remembered. The captain pressed his ear to their chests, tapped their knees, checked their teeth. He made them walk straight lines. He studied their bodies as if they were livestock at market. When a young servant girl, Mary Caldwell, began to cry, Thorne actually smiled. He told her tears were proof of a sound nervous system, and wrote in his book. 8 people were chosen that day: Samuel Hawthorne, his nephew Peter, 2 Scottish carpenters, 3 enslaved workers, and Mary Caldwell. They were bound, but treated with blankets and water, prepared for a journey. Before leaving, Thorne told the stunned survivors, "These individuals will contribute to an endeavor that will benefit all mankind. Do not interfere, and no harm will come to your community." Then, as quietly as they came, they were gone. The spread of terror. 3 days later, Thorne struck Cedar Point, a fishing village. Again, no violence. Again, a careful selection. 6 colonists vanished, including James Fairfax, a blacksmith, and Sarah Pemberton, a young mother torn from her baby. 1 fisherman, Elias Dunham, hid beneath a boat and later told authorities. Thorne asked about our health, our families, our work. He wanted those who had never suffered fevers or pox. When he learned Fairfax had never been sick a day in his life, he smiled like a man who'd found treasure. The pattern repeated again and again. Lumber camps, trading posts, river crossings, all struck with eerie precision. In 6 weeks, 42 colonists were taken. And always the same method: silence, examination, selection, departure. Parents began hiding their healthy children, even making them appear sick to avoid capture. Villages that had survived wars and pirate raids now lived in a new kind of fear. Because this enemy's purpose could not be understood. The pregnant woman's testimony. The final raid came on November 28, 1714, at Haven's Rest, a small port where ships stopped for water and supplies. There, tavern keeper's wife Martha Pickering was examined by Thorne himself. But when he discovered she was pregnant, he released her immediately. Her testimony still chills readers today. He pressed on my belly, asked about my other children, and spoke in words I did not understand, Latin, medical terms. Then he told me I was unsuitable for his work. Before leaving, he said, "The 42 souls I have gathered will help unlock the secrets of life itself. Their sacrifice will benefit all mankind, though they may not live to see the fruits of it." The search begins. Panic swept through Carolina. Families begged for their loved ones. Ransoms were offered, but no demands came. Governor Charles Craven launched the largest search in the colony's history. HMS Squirrel, HMS Garland, and the armed merchantman Carolina Merchant were dispatched, joined by privateers and adventurers lured by reward money. The search uncovered terrifying evidence. On Kiowa Island, investigators found a camp with organized fire pits, latrines, and, most horrifying of all, makeshift surgical tables stained with blood. Unfamiliar instruments lay scattered. Curved saws, strange forceps, glass vials with unknown residues. Lieutenant William Harrington reported, "This was no pirate camp. It was a medical facility. Procedures were performed here, systematic, deliberate. This is not the chaos of raiders, but the work of men with an agenda." More sites were found on barrier islands, each showing signs of planned medical activity. The most shocking discovery came on Gull's Rest Island. There, investigators found a massive abandoned camp with rows of sleeping spaces, benches around a central fire, and what appeared to be a lectern. It looked less like a pirate hideout and more like a field hospital, or even a classroom. What exactly was Thorne teaching? And what had become of the 42 captives? Right finger. That's where part 2 ends. In part 3, we'll follow the search deeper into the Caribbean, uncovering evidence of Thorne's floating laboratories, and the experiments that turned him into one of history's most feared, and most forgotten, pirates. So if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because the story of Captain Ezekiel Thorne is just beginning. Would you like me to move straight into drafting part 3 about the Caribbean search and Thorne's experiments at sea, or do you want to review parts 1 and 2 together first before I continue? Part 3: The Surgeon's Tables. Movie camera hook. Imagine this: deep in the Carolina wilderness, a group of soldiers stumble upon a hidden camp. At first glance, it looks ordinary: rough tents, fire pits, scattered supplies. But then they notice the tables. Wooden tables stained dark, drainage grooves carved into the surface, as if someone expected blood to flow. And nearby, bundles of papers filled with sketches of human anatomy, sketches far more detailed than anything European medicine had yet discovered. This was no pirate hideout. This was a laboratory. When Captain Morrison's men first found the camp, they assumed it was another abandoned pirate station. A place for raiding parties to rest, repair ships, maybe trade stolen goods. But something felt wrong. The tents weren't random. They were organized in a perfect circle, almost military in precision. Cooking fires had been carefully placed. Storage barrels were stacked in neat rows. This wasn't the chaos of desperate outlaws, it was order, discipline, planning. And then they saw the awning. Beneath stretched a row of long wooden tables and benches. Not for dining, not for work. These tables bore unmistakable marks: knife cuts into bone, saw grooves, bloodstains that had seeped deep into the wood. Morrison described it in his report: this was no workshop for sailors. It was a surgeon's hall, prepared for the dissection of living flesh. The colony's only trained physician, Dr. NYI Alexander Whiteside, was called to examine the site. Whiteside was no ordinary frontier doctor. He had studied at the University of Edinburgh, one of Europe's finest medical schools, and could read the Latin texts of Galen and Vesalius. What he found shocked even him. The tool marks matched advanced surgical techniques: bone sawing, joint separation, careful incisions designed not just to wound but to study how the body reacted. Drainage grooves on the tables showed forethought, as if the operator expected rivers of blood and had designed ways to channel it. Whoever worked here was not a butcher. He was a trained surgeon. And then came the notes. Buried beneath one of the wooden platforms, soldiers uncovered a leather bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were pages of notes and drawings, some written in flawless Latin, others in a strange coded script. Whiteside translated what he could. What he read kept him awake for weeks. The documents described human anatomy in shocking detail: blood circulation mapped years before European doctors confirmed it, nervous system reactions carefully catalogued, experiments on breathing, pulse, and muscle reflex. Procedures that legitimate medicine wouldn't master until decades later were already here, written in a pirate's hand. But this was no academic text. These weren't clean dissections of corpses. They were records of living experiments. Whiteside's report to Governor Craven was blunt. The author of these papers has attained knowledge of the human frame that equals or surpasses the greatest of Europe's physicians. Yet the methods described reveal an abandonment of Christian morality. These were no patients. These were subjects. Tested, broken, dissected alive. Faced with such horror, the colonial government panicked. If news spread that pirates were experimenting on settlers like cattle, Charleston could collapse in terror. So the decision was made. The evidence would be sealed. Families of the missing were told their loved ones had drowned in a shipwreck while fleeing pirates. The documents and instruments were quietly shipped to London. The rest was burned. Officially, Captain Ezekiel Thorne vanished into the mists of history. But the whispers never stopped. Fishermen told of strange lights on barrier islands, patterns of fire that didn't look like camps but signals, deliberate and organized. Merchant captains claimed to have seen abandoned shore camps, recent tool use, still warm fire pits, but no inhabitants. As if the occupants had just melted into the forest. The pattern suggested something chilling. Thorne's work had not ended. It was moving, shifting from island to island, careful never to stay long enough to be caught. And then, in the spring of 1715, proof arrived from the unlikeliest source. The Spanish trading vessel Santa Catalina limped into Charlestown harbor after surviving what its captain swore was the strangest pirate encounter in his 30 years at sea. Captain Diego Velázquez was no stranger to danger. He had faced English, French, and Dutch raiders across the Caribbean. But what happened off the coast of Florida, he told officials, was unlike anything he had ever seen. A ship came upon us, he said, but they did not fire their cannons. They did not attempt to board. Instead, under a flag of truce, their captain requested only this, that he be allowed to examine our crew for signs of disease. Velázquez at first refused. Pirates do not ask politely. Pirates kill, rob, plunder. But when several of his sailors began showing symptoms of yellow fever, the dreaded vomito negro, the captain hesitated. The stranger promised he could help. The description Velázquez gave matched the same man whispered about in Carolina, a tall, educated Englishman, dressed in naval fashion without insignia, carrying a leather-bound journal. His obsession was not treasure, not ships, but human bodies. He introduced himself not as a pirate, but as a physician. What happened next, Velázquez insisted, defied reason. The captain inspected the sick men, took notes, and administered remedies. Some of the crew recovered with unnatural speed. Others did not. But before leaving, the stranger thanked Velázquez politely, as though he had just completed a house call, and returned to his ship without looting a single coin. The name he gave, Velázquez remembered clearly. Captain Ezekiel Thorne. This revelation shattered any illusion that the disappearances of 1714 were isolated events. Thorne was alive, practicing medicine, or something far darker, on the open seas. His motives were not wealth or power. They were knowledge, and the colonies, Spain, and even Britain's own navy were powerless to stop him. Movie camera cliffhanger for Part 4. If Thorne's methods were horrifying in the Carolina wilderness, what he unleashed at sea was worse. Reports from sailors across the Caribbean tell of ghost ships, crews vanishing overnight, and entire vessels found adrift with no living soul aboard. In Part 4, we'll explore these maritime terrors, and why some believe Thorne's experiments never truly ended. Right finger if you're hooked by this story, don't forget to subscribe, because what's coming next is darker than anything you've heard so far. Would you like me to go ahead and expand this Part 3 to a full approximately 1,000 words draft, with more atmospheric detail about the camp discovery and the Spanish encounter, so it's ready to be used directly in your YouTube script? Part 4 Ghosts of the Caribbean. Movie camera hook. Picture this. A merchant ship drifts silently across the Caribbean, its sails torn but still catching the wind. A boarding party climbs aboard, weapons ready, expecting a fight. But instead, they find silence. No gunfire. No screams. Just an eerie emptiness. The crew's belongings are scattered as if they'd vanished mid-task. Half-eaten meals, unfinished letters, hammocks still swinging. But not a single living soul remains. These weren't ghost stories made up to scare sailors. These were official reports. And in case after case, one name kept surfacing, Captain Ezekiel Thorne. By 1715, news of Thorne's unusual raids had spread far beyond the Carolina coast. He wasn't just a local terror anymore, he was becoming a legend whispered in taverns from Havana to Port Royal. But unlike Blackbeard or Calico Jack, Thorne's name wasn't followed by tales of buried treasure or bloody battles. Instead, people spoke of him in hushed tones, as if saying too much might summon him. Why? Because Thorne's piracy had nothing to do with gold. He was hunting people. Ships adrift, Crews gone. One of the earliest confirmed incidents came from a Dutch fleet discovered drifting between Jamaica and Hispaniola. The vessel showed no signs of combat. Its cargo remained untouched, but every member of its 30-man crew had disappeared. Boarders noted a few strange details. Medical instruments scattered in the captain's cabin, scraps of paper covered in anatomical sketches, and what appeared to be bloodstains in the lower hold. The official Dutch report dismissed it as mutiny, claiming the crew must have turned on one another and fled in stolen boats. But sailors knew better. The story spread quickly. Thorne's men took them. The pattern emerges. Over the next year, similar cases multiplied. A French brigantine, found empty near the Bahamas. An English sloop, crew vanished though her cargo of sugar was untouched. Even a Spanish warship, the Nuestra Señora del Pilar, discovered adrift with powder stores intact but her gun crews gone. Always the same pattern. No plunder, no battle damage, no survivors. Just silence and a faint trail of medical tools, papers, or journals. It was as if Thorne was running experiments on a scale larger than anyone could imagine, an entire ocean as his laboratory. Survivor testimonies. But not every encounter ended in total disappearance. A few survivors lived to tell their tales, and what they described was worse than death. One was an Irish sailor named Connolly, who staggered ashore in Barbados half dead. His body bore dozens of small incisions, crudely stitched, as if someone had been studying how long he could survive repeated wounds. He whispered of a Dr. Captain, who examined him like a specimen, asking him to describe what he felt as knives pierced his skin. Connolly died within hours, but not before gasping one last sentence. He said the pain was knowledge. Another came from a Spanish cabin boy rescued off Cuba. The boy claimed he and several others had been forced to run endurance drills on deck, pushed until their hearts gave out. Thorne, notebook in hand, recorded every collapse with the cool detachment of a scientist. The Phantom Fleet. By the summer of 1716, rumors swirled that Thorne commanded not one ship, but several. Survivors spoke of seeing a fleet, 2 or 3 vessels, sleek and fast, with sails patched black. They moved like shadows, appearing at dawn or dusk, surrounding a merchantman without firing a single shot. Instead of looting, they boarded calmly, selecting only certain crew members, men and women alike, based on age, health, or physical strength. The unlucky were marched away at knife point. The rest were left unharmed. Cargo stayed untouched. This wasn't piracy. It was selection. Theories spread. Colonial officials, desperate to maintain order, offered conventional explanations. Some said Thorne was a madman driven insane by disease. Others argued he was building a secret army of slaves. But among sailors, the belief grew darker, that Thorne was searching for something. Not treasure, not conquest, something inside the human body. Sailors whispered that he was trying to conquer death itself. That he believed, through pain and experiment, he could unlock the secrets of life. And given the uncanny survival of some of his subjects, men recovering from wounds that should have killed them, many feared he was succeeding. Ghost lights. Accounts also mention strange sightings at sea. Faint, unnatural lights glowing on the decks of Thorne's ships at night. Blue-green flares that seemed to ripple like veins across the sails. Some captains swore they saw these lights darting across the ocean like fireflies, guiding the pirate fleet. A Portuguese navigator who escaped one such encounter reported that the lights weren't lanterns or fires, but emanations from the bodies of men under torment. His claim was dismissed as madness brought on by rum, but sailors repeated it anyway. To them, Thorne wasn't just experimenting with flesh. He was experimenting with the soul. The British reaction. Back in London, the Admiralty could no longer ignore the mounting reports. Colonial governors were demanding action, merchants were threatening to stop trading, and ordinary settlers were terrified. But how do you hunt a man who doesn't steal treasure, who leaves no prisoners, who sails without leaving a trace? The Royal Navy launched several expeditions into the Caribbean between 1716 and 1717, but none ever caught Thorne. Ships sent after him simply returned empty-handed, or didn't return at all. Behind closed doors, whispers in Whitehall suggested something even more troubling, that some of Thorne's medical notes had already found their way back to Europe. Someone, somewhere, was protecting him. Terror at sea. The most chilling tale came in late 1717, when a Jamaican merchant ship was found adrift with its crew alive, but deranged. Every man on board had been blinded. Their eyes crudely removed, the sockets stitched shut. They could not explain what had happened, only that a doctor in fine clothes had promised to show them the world in a new light. None survived the year. This incident cemented Thorne's reputation as more than a pirate. To many, he was now a myth, a boogeyman of the Caribbean. Mothers in Port Royal whispered his name to frighten children into obedience. Sailors refused to sail under certain moons, fearing they might cross his path. But for those who studied the sea charts, the pattern was clear. Thorne wasn't striking randomly. He was moving along specific routes, as though following an experiment across geography itself. Movie camera cliffhanger for Part 5. What was Thorne searching for? In Part 5, we'll dive into the secret records kept not in England, but in Spain, monastery archives that suggest Thorne's work was tied to something far older than colonial America. Something buried deep in the history of medicine, alchemy, and forbidden knowledge that stretched back centuries. Right finger if you're following this journey into the darkest corners of American history, don't forget to subscribe. The story of Captain Ezekiel Thorne is only getting more disturbing. Would you like me to make Part 5 next, continuing straight into the Spanish monastery records and their connection to forbidden European medical traditions? Part 5 The Monastery Secrets. Movie camera hook. Imagine a locked chamber deep inside a Spanish monastery. Dust lies thick on the shelves, candles burn low, and a monk trembles as he opens a leather-bound volume forbidden to most eyes. Inside are drawings, grisly, detailed sketches of human bodies opened like maps, their veins and nerves charted with obsessive precision. At the bottom of the page, a single name appears again and again. Not Thorne, but something far older. By 1718, the Caribbean had had enough of Captain Ezekiel Thorne's terror. Entire villages feared his silent raids, and sailors whispered about his fleet of ghost ships. But what no one in the colonies knew was that in Europe, scholars and monks were beginning to connect Thorne's methods to something ancient, something that predated the New World entirely. The Spanish connection. The first clue emerged in Madrid, when reports from Captain Velázquez of the Santa Catalina reached the Council of the Indies. Velázquez's testimony, that Thorne had boarded under a flag of truce, claiming to be a physician, was unusual enough. But when the council's scribes compared his descriptions of Thorne's journals to records kept in their archives, a chilling similarity appeared. The drawings Velázquez described matched those in manuscripts seized by the Inquisition centuries earlier, manuscripts written in a mixture of Latin, Greek, and medical cipher. These texts had been locked away in monasteries, condemned as heretical experiments. Now, 200 years later, Thorne seemed to be repeating them. Secrets beneath stone walls. The council sent copies of Velázquez's report to the monastery of San Lorenzo de el Escorial, north of Madrid, a place already infamous for guarding forbidden texts. There, a Dominican monk named Brother Mateo began digging through the archives. What he found was terrifying. Hidden among confiscated alchemical treatises and heretical medical writings were journals from a 15th-century surgeon named Alonso de Benavides. Benavides had been a court physician in Valencia but was tried by the Inquisition for unnatural curiosity. His crime: conducting secret dissections, recording the effects of wounds on living prisoners, and pursuing what he called la ciencia de la inmortalidad, the science of immortality. And the resemblance to Thorne's work was unmistakable. The forbidden manuscripts. Brother Mateo copied passages for comparison. Benavides had written of testing how long a man could survive without food, water, or sleep. He described cutting nerves to see how they controlled movement, recording the screams of prisoners as data. Most chilling were his references to the threshold, a state between life and death where, he claimed, the secrets of the soul could be observed. In one marginal note, Benavides even drew the same drainage channels into wooden tables that Morrison's men had discovered on Gull's Rest Island 2 centuries later. How could Thorne, an English surgeon in the 1700s, be repeating experiments that had been buried in Spanish archives since the 1500s? Unless someone had given him access. The whispered order. Rumors swirled that Thorne wasn't acting alone. Colonial officials whispered of a secret society, scholars, doctors, and nobles, who preserved forbidden medical knowledge across generations. The Inquisition had tried to burn their books, but the knowledge survived, passed from one surgeon to another in coded notes and hidden manuscripts. Some even claimed the order stretched back to the Arab physicians of Córdoba, or to the darker corners of medieval Europe where alchemists mixed science with sorcery. Their obsession was always the same: conquering death. And now, in the Caribbean, Thorne had become their instrument. Eyewitness in Havana. In 1719, another piece of evidence surfaced in Havana. A Jesuit missionary returning from the interior claimed he had seen Thorne's men transporting captives inland, not to sell as slaves, but to hold in makeshift camps. The missionary described hearing Latin prayers mixed with strange chants, and he swore he saw diagrams pinned to the walls of a crude wooden chapel, drawings of human hearts, dissected eyes, and lungs inflated outside the body. When he reported this to his superiors, they hushed him. Officially, the Jesuits claimed the missionary was ill, his mind corrupted by fever. But his testimony made its way to the monastery archives, where Brother Mateo noted, "The doctor continues the work of Benavides." Thorne's true goal. So what was Thorne after? Not just knowledge of wounds or disease. Not just surgical skill. The manuscripts pointed to a larger goal, the belief that by studying the body at the brink of death, by holding a man in that threshold state, one could learn to manipulate the soul itself. Benavides wrote that if the soul could be delayed in leaving, trapped between flesh and eternity, then perhaps it could be guided, controlled, even preserved. Thorne's chilling words to survivors, "Your sacrifice will benefit all mankind," suddenly had context. He wasn't killing for pleasure. He believed he was building a new science, one that would rewrite the boundaries of life. The London cover-up. Meanwhile in London, whispers about Thorne reached the Royal Society, the heart of Enlightenment science. Some fellows argued that his discoveries, however horrific, might advance medicine by decades. Others demanded silence, fearing scandal if Britain were linked to such atrocities. One report, now lost but mentioned in private correspondence, suggested that Thorne's notes, or copies of them, had reached London through unnamed patrons. If true, it meant the cover-up wasn't just about preventing panic in the colonies. It was about harvesting forbidden knowledge. A haunting discovery. In 1720, Spanish monks uncovered one last clue. While cataloging a batch of confiscated books from Seville, they found a small journal written in English. Its title page bore no name, but its contents matched Thorne's handwriting preserved in the colonial archives. Inside were observations of experiments conducted not in Carolina or the Caribbean, but in London itself, years earlier. Notes about stolen corpses from plague pits. Sketches of surgical tools, borrowed from naval stores. Even references to my benefactor, a man described only as the Grey Patron. The monks realized something dreadful. Thorne had not invented his horrors in America. He had been prepared for them long before he ever crossed the ocean. Movie camera cliffhanger for Part 6. Who was this Grey Patron? In Part 6, we'll trace the shadowy figure behind Captain Thorne, the mysterious man who may have funded his voyage, supplied his instruments, and connected him to a secret network of scholars obsessed with death. Was Thorne truly a monster alone, or just one disciple of a much larger order? Right finger if you want to keep uncovering the terrifying true history behind America's forgotten pirate doctor. Stay tuned for Part 6. The deeper we go, the darker it gets. Would you like me to make Part 6 reveal the Grey Patron as a European noble or secret society leader, tying it to London's Royal Society and early medical schools, or would you prefer him to remain mysterious and shadowy for now? Part 6 The Grey Patron. Movie camera hook. What if Captain Ezekiel Thorne, the surgeon-turned-pirate who vanished with 42 colonists, was never the mastermind at all? What if someone else, far more powerful, had been pulling the strings from the very beginning? Tonight, we uncover the shadowy figure known only as the Grey Patron, a man whispered about in royal courts, feared in secret societies, and tied directly to Thorne's descent into horror. A name in the shadows. When Spanish monks in Seville found Thorne's journal in 1720, one phrase kept appearing in his notes: "My benefactor, the Grey Patron." This mysterious figure provided money for ships, rare surgical instruments, and even access to bodies no ordinary surgeon could acquire. But who was he? The colonial authorities had no record of such a man. Yet private letters in London, buried in the archives of the Royal Society, suggested a powerful patron who walked the thin line between respected science and forbidden knowledge. London, 1705. Before Thorne ever set foot in Carolina, he was a young surgeon in London. According to naval rosters, he had just returned from the Caribbean with honors. But hidden correspondence paints a darker picture. One letter, written by Dr. Edmund Paris to a fellow physician, reads, "Greater than, Thorne has fallen in with a certain nobleman whose resources seem limitless. This man arranges for anatomical material no college could provide. Thorne speaks of him in reverence, calling him the Grey Patron, as if he were both master and priest." The Grey Patron, it seemed, was no ordinary nobleman. He had ties to England's expanding medical schools but operated in secrecy, providing corpses stolen from plague pits, criminals misplaced from Newgate Prison, and even living subjects from London's poorest slums. The house without windows. Testimonies from the time describe a house on the outskirts of London, near Deptford Docks. Locals called it the house without windows because its upper floors were boarded up, and strange cries were heard at night. Thorne was seen entering the house on more than one occasion, carrying crates marked with the seal of the Royal Navy. Inside, according to a later confession by a servant, were rooms outfitted like laboratories, wooden tables, glass jars filled with organs preserved in spirits, and manuscripts in Latin chained to lecterns so they could not be stolen. The servant described the master of the house as a man of wealth, always wearing gray velvet gloves that covered his hands even in summer heat. No one ever spoke his true name. To the few who encountered him, he was simply the Grey Patron. A pattern of disappearances. The deeper investigators dug, the more unsettling the pattern became. Between 1705 and 1712, a series of unexplained disappearances struck London's East End. Dockworkers, apprentices, washerwomen, ordinary people, were reported missing, never to be seen again. The constables of the time wrote them off as crime or poverty, but private records tell another story. Several missing individuals matched descriptions later found in Thorne's anatomical notes: people with strong lungs, rare immunity to disease, or unusual bone structures. It seemed the Grey Patron was already testing a theory. And Thorne was his eager student. Secrets in the Royal Society. In 1711, Thorne presented a paper to members of the Royal Society titled, "On the Preservation of Life During Extreme Trauma." Most fellows dismissed it as eccentric, even dangerous. But one anonymous reviewer praised it as a glimpse of the future. That reviewer, according to later speculation, may have been the Grey Patron himself. He moved in high circles, mingling with natural philosophers, alchemists, and wealthy patrons who funded voyages of discovery. To them, Thorne was not a criminal but a pioneer, someone willing to do the work others feared. One chilling rumor claimed that the patron had promised Thorne command of a ship if he would take his experiments overseas, far from London's watchful eyes. The voyage to Carolina. By 1714, Thorne was gone from England. His naval service had ended under mysterious circumstances, officially, illness, though some whispered he had been dismissed for excessive zeal. Yet almost immediately, he resurfaced in the Americas with a well-funded vessel, trained men, and instruments no pirate could have acquired on his own. Who paid for this transformation? Who supplied the gold, the weapons, the journals? Survivors of Thorne's raids remembered him keeping a leather-bound book filled with medical notes in a hand not his own. It was neat, precise, and centuries old. Some suspected it was a copy of Benavides's forbidden manuscripts. Others believed it was written by the Grey Patron himself. The Patron's motives. But why fund such horrors? One theory is that the Patron sought the same thing Benavides had, control over life and death. Another theory suggests he belonged to a secret brotherhood within Europe, a society that blended science, alchemy, and occult practices. They called themselves Custodes Vitae, the keepers of life. Their obsession was not to cure disease or save lives but to break death itself, to chain the soul the way others chained the body. If Thorne succeeded, the Patron would have the key to immortality, not through prayer or faith, but through science twisted into nightmare. A ghostly encounter at sea. By 1716, rumors of the Grey Patron had reached sailors in the Caribbean. One tale told of a silver-haired gentleman spotted aboard a frigate anchored off Tortuga. He wore gloves despite the heat and spoke in flawless Latin with Thorne. No one saw him board or leave the ship. He seemed to appear only when the moon was high, standing beside Thorne as they studied captives like cattle at market. Whether the story was true or not, it spread like wildfire. Among sailors, the Grey Patron was no longer a nobleman but a phantom, a demon in human skin guiding Thorne toward ever darker experiments. Silence in London. Back in England, all official mention of Thorne ceased. When colonial reports about the disappearances reached London, the files were sealed, marked, for Crown eyes only. Scholars who asked too many questions found themselves discredited, their careers destroyed. It was as if someone very powerful wanted Thorne's crimes forgotten. And if the Grey Patron truly sat in Parliament, or at the table of the Royal Society, he had all the influence needed to bury the truth. The Patron's legacy. What terrified researchers centuries later was not just what Thorne did, but the possibility that the Grey Patron's work survived. In medical libraries across Europe, strange manuscripts began surfacing in the 1800s, drawings and notes eerily similar to Thorne's. None bore his name. Instead, they were signed only with a small symbol, a pair of gloved hands. Movie camera cliffhanger for Part 7. In the next chapter, we follow the trail of the Grey Patron across Europe, uncovering how his secret society operated in shadows from London to Rome. But more chilling still, we'll reveal the first evidence that Thorne's experiments didn't end in 1714. Someone kept them alive, deep in the swamps of Carolina. Right fingers stay with me, mystery lovers. The Grey Patron's story is just beginning. Do you want Part 7 to shift back to the American colonies, the swamp camps, surviving experiments, or continue unfolding the European secret society before the final parts bring both threads together? Part 7: The Swamp Camps. Movie camera hook. Imagine wandering deep into a Carolina swamp, hearing not only the buzz of mosquitoes and the cry of night birds, but also faint human voices chanting in a language you don't understand. What if the disappearances of Captain Thorne's men were not the end of the nightmare, but the beginning of something even darker? Tonight, we uncover the story of the swamp camps, hidden places where Thorne's experiments may have continued long after his ship was thought lost. Whispers along the coast. By 1717, the colonial authorities had tried to bury the truth. Official records said the missing families had drowned while fleeing by boat. But the people who lived along the Carolina coast, the fishermen, the traders, the native scouts, they knew better. Men reported strange sightings, lights at night deep in the marshes, moving in patterns too precise to be campfires. Boats without sails, drifting silently, carrying pale men who never spoke. Screams carried on the wind at midnight, too far inland to be explained by drunken brawls or hunting accidents. The settlers whispered one phrase over and over: "Thorne is not gone." The first expedition. In the summer of 1717, Governor Craven ordered a quiet investigation. He could not risk another public panic, but he also couldn't ignore the growing fear among the colonists. A party of 8 men, soldiers, a native guide, and Dr. Nyi Whiteside himself, ventured into the swamp south of Charlestown. For 3 days they found nothing but mud, reeds, and clouds of insects. But on the 4th day, they discovered something that froze them where they stood. Under a cluster of cypress trees stood 3 crude huts, built from driftwood and canvas. Inside were wooden tables stained dark, with grooves cut into the surface. Just like before, just like the island where Thorne's camp had been. And beneath one of the tables, buried shallow in the muck, was a bundle of parchment. The swamp manuscripts. The papers were half rotted from the damp, but dry. Whiteside recognized the handwriting instantly. It was the same as the notes he had translated years earlier, the same twisted mixture of Latin, cipher, and medical observation. But these notes were different. They were dated 1716, 2 years after Thorne had supposedly vanished. The entries described new subjects acquired from the hinterland tribes, and refinements in the study of endurance thresholds. One chilling line read, "Greater than the Patron's methods endure. Pain is but the door through which true knowledge enters." It was signed with the symbol of 2 gloved hands. The skeletons. Deeper in the swamp, the men uncovered shallow graves. Some contained bones, picked clean by time. Others were worse, partial skeletons, bones cut with the precision of a surgeon's saw. The native guide refused to go further. He said the land was cursed, haunted by the spirits of broken people. That night, he vanished without a sound, leaving only his footprints in the mud. The remaining soldiers wanted to burn the huts and leave. But Whiteside insisted they take the manuscripts back to Charlestown. He believed they proved that Thorne, or someone trained by him, was still alive. Colonial silence. Governor Craven read the swamp manuscripts in silence. When he finished, he ordered them sealed in a chest and placed under guard. Officially, the expedition found nothing. But word spread anyway. Fishermen swore they saw soldiers bringing back boxes from the swamp at night. Local women whispered of red water, where the soldiers had washed their boots. The government's silence only deepened the terror. If Thorne was alive, why not hunt him down? If he was dead, why hide the proof? A survivor's tale. In 1718, a runaway indentured servant stumbled into Charlestown half dead from exposure. His name was Thomas Elroy, and what he claimed shocked even the most skeptical. Elroy swore he had been captured by men in gray coats while traveling inland. They dragged him to a camp in the swamps, where he was strapped to a table under canvas. For days, he was prodded, cut, and questioned, not about his labor or his wealth, but about his body. "They wanted to know how much pain I could stand," he whispered before collapsing. They wrote it all down. They said the patron required proof. Elroy died of infection 2 weeks later. The governor ordered his testimony struck from the records. But to the people of Charlestown, his story was proof. Thorne's work was alive in the swamps. The disappearing soldiers. When another search party was sent in late 1718, only 3 of the 10 men returned. They were found wandering near the Santee River, clothes shredded, eyes wild. They refused to speak of what had happened. One man ripped his own tongue out rather than describe what he had seen. The 2 who survived long enough to talk told of cages made of wood and rope, of prisoners kept in water up to their waists, of strange chanting in Latin mixed with words from no known tongue. The soldiers swore Thorne himself was there, older, thinner, but alive. Always with his leather-bound journal, always with the gray-gloved figure at his side. Legends of the Swamp Doctor. By 1720, the settlers had a name for the figure that haunted the wetlands, the Swamp Doctor. Children were warned not to wander too far, lest the doctor find them. Hunters claimed to hear footsteps behind them, though no one was there. And at night, some swore they saw lanterns swinging among the trees, moving in deliberate patterns, as if someone were marking the land, dividing it, preparing it for something greater. The fear was not just that Thorne survived. The fear was that he had begun building something permanent, something that would last long after the colonists were gone. The disappearance of Dr. Whiteside. In 1721, Drive. NYI Whiteside, the surgeon who had uncovered so many of Thorne's secrets, vanished without a trace. His house in Charlestown was found ransacked, his medical texts stolen. On his desk lay a single page of parchment. It bore the same symbol, 2 gloved hands. Some claimed he had been kidnapped and taken into the swamps. Others believed he had willingly joined the Grey Patron's work, seduced by forbidden knowledge. Whatever the truth, he was never seen again. Movie camera cliffhanger for Part 8. In the next chapter, we follow the chilling trail beyond Carolina, into the Caribbean once more, where ships reported ghostly encounters with vessels crewed by pale men, and where whispers grew of a hidden island laboratory, the place sailors called the Isle of Ashes. Would you like me to start Part 8 with a direct pirate-style sea horror scene, like the Spanish ship encounter told from a survivor's view, or open with Charlestown colonists realizing the experiments have spread across the sea? Part 8: The Isle of Ashes. Movie camera hook. Imagine sailing across calm waters under a full moon, when suddenly another ship appears out of the mist, silent, lanterns glowing in strange patterns, its crew pale and glassy-eyed, watching you with faces that don't look entirely human. This is the story of the Isle of Ashes, the place sailors whispered was the true heart of Captain Ezekiel Thorne's unholy experiments. Ghost ship in the Caribbean. In the spring of 1722, a merchant vessel out of Havana limped into Kingston Harbor. Her crew was broken men, some raving, others unable to speak at all. The captain, Juan Rojas, delivered a testimony so disturbing that colonial officials quietly sealed it away. 2 weeks earlier, Rojas's ship had been sailing north of Cuba when they spotted another vessel drifting in the fog. No flag, no signal, just a single lantern swinging from the bow. Thinking it might be a derelict, Rojas approached cautiously. But as they neared, the crew saw figures standing perfectly still on deck, rows of men, pale and silent, staring straight ahead. Not one moved, not one spoke. The ship bore no sails, yet somehow it glided across the waves with unnatural speed. Then, as the lanterns began to glow brighter, the pale men raised their heads in unison. And from the shadows stepped a man with a leather-bound book. Captain Ezekiel Thorne. The flag of truce. Rojas swore Thorne hailed them in perfect Spanish, asking not for surrender, not for gold, but for permission to board and examine their health. He carried no cutlass, no pistols, only a doctor's satchel. When Rojas refused, the pale crew suddenly began to chant. Low, rhythmic sounds, half prayer, half moan, that carried across the water. The air grew cold, though no wind stirred. Fearing witchcraft, Rojas ordered full sail. But as they turned away, he saw the pale crew smiling. Their teeth were filed into sharp points, like animals. The ghost ship turned too, following them for 2 full nights before vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. Rumors spread. Sailors across the Caribbean began trading whispered stories of Thorne's ship. Some called it La Barco de los Muertos, the ship of the dead. Others said it was crewed by men who had been cut open and stitched back together, their humanity burned away. But the most frightening rumors came from wreck survivors who swore the ship did not kill its captives. Instead, the crew took only a handful of men each time, chosen carefully. They would inspect teeth, measure arms, press fingers against veins, just as Thorne had once done in Carolina. And then those chosen would vanish into the mist. The hidden island. By 1723, word had spread of a place sailors called the Isle of Ashes. An island not found on any chart, always described as blackened by fire, where smoke rose endlessly into the sky. A Dutch privateer claimed he had been shipwrecked there after a storm. He and his men stumbled inland, only to find huts, tables, and iron cages scattered among the volcanic rock. The ground itself was carved with strange drainage channels, leading toward pits of ash that smoldered day and night. The privateer swore he saw Thorne himself, directing pale men in surgical aprons as they carried bound captives into a cave that glowed with firelight. He escaped by hiding in a barrel and drifting out to sea. His men did not. Colonial dismissal. When reports of the Isle of Ashes reached Charlestown, colonial officials dismissed them as drunken sailor tales. But Governor Craven's successor, James Moore, received a secret letter from Kingston warning. Greater than, the experiments begun in your swamps are no longer contained. They travel the seas, gathering subjects from every nation. If not stopped, they will multiply. Moore quietly ordered ships to avoid the waters near Cuba and Florida, though he never told the settlers why. The mark of the Patron. What gave weight to the stories was the discovery of the mark. Several wrecked ships found adrift bore strange carvings scorched into their timbers, two gloved hands, etched deep into the wood. Survivors taken prisoner and later released claimed Thorne's men always left that mark when they had completed their work. It was not a warning. It was a signature. By 1725, sailors began to refuse routes that passed through those waters, believing any ship bearing that mark was cursed. Insurance rates skyrocketed. Merchants lost fortunes. But the true cost was measured in the faces of missing men whose families never saw them again. A survivor returns. In 1726, one man returned alive from the Isle of Ashes. His name was Isaac Bellamy, a sailor from Charleston who had been captured during a raid near the Bahamas. Bellamy's testimony was so horrifying that the record was sealed by colonial officials. But fragments survived in family letters. He told of being strapped to a table in a cave lit by torches. Thorne stood over him, calm, surgical, noting every twitch of pain. The pale men held his limbs as the doctor tested reactions to heat, pressure, and incisions. Bellamy begged for death. Instead, Thorne released him, saying only, "Greater than, carry back the story. Knowledge requires witnesses." Bellamy staggered home, broken in body and mind, his skin scarred with burns and cuts. He died within the year, but not before drawing a map of the Isle. That map was quietly sent to London. The failed expedition. In 1727, the British Navy secretly dispatched a frigate to locate and destroy the Isle of Ashes. Records show the ship left Portsmouth with 180 men. It never returned. Months later, fishermen found fragments of its hull floating near Jamaica, scorched black as if burned from within. The Admiralty denied the expedition ever existed. But families of the missing officers swore their loved ones had been sacrificed to silence the truth. Whispers in Charleston. Back in Charleston, fear took new form. Residents claimed they saw pale men wandering near the harbor at night, watching, always silent. Some swore they saw Captain Thorne himself, older now, but unmistakable, tall, lean, carrying his leather-bound book. And every few months, another ship failed to return. Another family lit candles for sailors who never came home. The settlers began to say what officials would not. Thorne was building something. The Isle of Ashes was not an end, it was a beginning. Movie camera cliffhanger for Part 9. In the next chapter, we'll follow the shocking story of how Thorne's knowledge reached London itself, how documents smuggled out of the Isle of Ashes sparked secret debates in the Royal Society, and how whispers of the Grey Patron began to haunt even the halls of power in England. Do you want me to make Part 9 focus on London's secret scientific circles, Royal Society, naval doctors, political cover-ups, or keep it tied mostly to American soil, showing how Charleston learns about the London debates? Part 9: The Secrets in London. Movie camera hook. Imagine a candlelit hall in London, where gentlemen in powdered wigs and silk coats gather to hear lectures on astronomy, physics, and medicine. But tonight's papers do not speak of the stars. They whisper of living bodies opened like books, of knowledge bought with screams. And though the crowd sits silent, every man knows the name never spoken aloud, Captain Ezekiel Thorne. Smuggled across the sea. In 1726, the same year Isaac Bellamy staggered back from the Isle of Ashes, a packet of papers arrived in London under strange circumstances. A merchant ship from Charleston delivered it directly to the Admiralty, sealed in wax and marked with the stamp of Governor James Moore. Inside were drawings, notes, and diagrams, written in a mix of Latin, Greek, and cipher. At first, clerks thought it nonsense. But one man, Jonathan Arkwright, physician to the Royal Navy, recognized the handwriting. It matched records from the British National Archives, where years earlier a surgeon named Ezekiel Thorne had filed reports from his time aboard HMS Defiance. The handwriting was the same, but the knowledge in these papers went far beyond anything a ship's surgeon should have known. The The Royal Society debate. Within weeks, the papers were in the hands of the Royal Society, England's most respected scientific body. There, in rooms that usually echoed with polite debates about telescopes and magnetism, men now pored over drawings of dissected bodies. One section described the flow of blood through the lungs, a concept William Harvey himself had only hinted at. Another detailed nervous system responses to pain, measured with cruel precision, as if every scream had been timed and catalogued. Some fellows of the society argued the knowledge was too valuable to ignore. If these observations are true, said Dr. Arkwright, then we stand on the edge of a new age in medicine. Others recoiled. These are not experiments, thundered Reverend Edmund Price, a theologian invited to the debate. They are abominations. Whoever wrote this has sold his soul for knowledge. Yet even the loudest critics could not deny the brilliance of the work. The Grey Patron. It was during these debates that whispers began of a mysterious figure known only as the Grey Patron. Some said he was an anonymous benefactor funding London's darkest experiments. Others claimed he was Thorne himself, returned from the colonies under another name, his hair grey, his eyes hollow, his purpose unchanged. Letters between society members mention the Patron's mark, two gloved hands drawn at the bottom of certain pages. The same symbol survivors had seen carved into ship timbers across the Caribbean. If Thorne was truly in London, he had not come to hide. He had come to spread his knowledge at the very heart of the empire. Forbidden experiments in the city. In 1728, rumors spread through the streets of London. Beggars disappeared from alleys near Moorfields. Paupers vanished from workhouses. Even prisoners awaiting trial were said to have been taken for science. At St. Bartholomew's Hospital, night porters swore they saw doctors carrying bodies through the back gates, long after curfew. One porter described a tall man in a naval coat, his hair streaked with gray, instructing younger surgeons as if conducting a lesson. He carried a leather-bound book, worn from years of use. When asked his name, the porter swore he answered only, "Greater than, I am the servant of knowledge. I am the patron." The Admiralty's silence. Families of the missing demanded answers, but the Admiralty offered none. The official story was always the same: shipwreck, robbery, escape. Behind closed doors, however, the government faced a terrible dilemma. The colonies had already been rattled by Thorne's raids. If Londoners learned the truth, that the same horrors had reached their own streets, it could spark panic across the empire. So the Admiralty chose silence. The papers were locked away in secure vaults, and anyone who asked too many questions found themselves dismissed, threatened, or quietly ruined. But silence could not erase the whispers. The chapel in the crypt. The most chilling story came from a clergyman named Father Samuel Dyer, who claimed he had been summoned to hear the confession of a dying man in the crypt beneath St. Paul's Cathedral. The man was a young surgeon, gaunt and fevered, who begged the priest to absolve him. He spoke of being recruited into a circle of medicine, where they studied not books, but living flesh. He described lantern-lit gatherings where Thorne, or the patron, lectured on anatomy while bound captives screamed from the tables. The surgeon said they believed they were serving mankind, unlocking the secrets of life itself. But his voice cracked when he admitted, "Greater than, each night I see their eyes. They look at me still, even when the body is ash. And I know, our master is no man, but a devil in human form." Before Father Dyer could press him further, the surgeon convulsed and died. His tongue was blackened, as if by poison. The fire of 1729. In December of 1729, a fire broke out in a warehouse by the Thames. Officially, it was blamed on careless dockworkers. But eyewitnesses swore they saw pale men carrying crates from the flames, their faces glowing with sweat yet showing no pain. Inside the smoldering ruins, investigators found charred tables, iron restraints, and surgical instruments. Among the ashes was a single unburned page, an anatomical sketch signed with two gloved hands. Londoners began calling the site, the Fire of Knowledge. Few dared walk near it, even years later. Back to the colonies. By 1730, reports of Thorne in London grew fewer, as if he had vanished once again. Some said he had been killed in the fire. Others claimed he had returned across the sea to continue his work where law and scrutiny could not follow. But one final rumor survived, that before leaving, Thorne had taken with him not just his journals, but several young surgeons eager to learn. Men trained in London, sworn to secrecy, willing to follow him into the unknown. The colonies would not remain safe for long. Movie camera cliffhanger for Part 10. In our final chapter, we'll uncover what happened when Thorne's legacy returned to American shores, when whispers of the Grey Patron grew into legends of ghost ships, cursed plantations, and experiments that defy explanation to this very day. Do you want Part 10 to give a definitive, terrifying conclusion, Thorne's fate revealed, or should it leave things unresolved and mysterious, like a legend that still haunts the present? Part 10: The Ghost of the Grey Patron. Movie camera hook. Every legend needs an ending. But some endings don't bring comfort. They bring only more questions. Tonight, we finish the tale of Captain Ezekiel Thorne, the naval surgeon turned pirate physician, whose obsession with unlocking the secrets of life left behind a trail of vanished colonists, blood-stained journals, and whispers of forbidden experiments. Some say he died centuries ago. Others believe he still sails the dark waters of the Atlantic, his work unfinished. Return to the New World. In 1732, nearly 20 years after the Carolina disappearances, ships began vanishing along the outer banks of North Carolina. These weren't ordinary pirate attacks. No cannon fire. No plunder. Instead, the ships were found adrift days later, sails intact, cargo untouched, but with their crews missing. The pattern was familiar. Colonial officials whispered that the Grey Patron had returned. One vessel, the Mercy Ann, was discovered near Ocracoke Inlet. Her captain's log survived, though water-stained and smeared with ink. His final entry read, "Greater than, a man of learning has come aboard. He asks only to examine the crew. He carries no weapon save a book. Yet the men obey him as if bewitched. I fear we shall not see England again." The log ended there. No crew was ever found. The disappearing settlements. By 1734, entire hamlets along the Carolina coast had emptied overnight. At Blackwater Creek, investigators found cooking pots still simmering over fires, tables laid for meals, and chairs pulled back as if the families had just risen. But no people. On the wall of one cabin, carved deep into the wood, were two symbols, two gloved hands pressed together, the mark of the patron. The colonists who remained grew desperate. Mothers rubbed ash into their children's skin to make them look sickly. Fathers broke their own teeth so their families might be spared if examined. Still, the disappearances continued. The hunter becomes the hunted. Governor Gabriel Johnston of North Carolina authorized a secret mission in 1735. 3 ships, HMS Valiant, Carolina Hope, and the privateer Red Swan, were dispatched with orders not to capture, but to kill Captain Thorne at all costs. Their pursuit led them to the waters of the Bahamas, where they sighted a vessel described as unnaturally silent upon the sea. The ship flew no colors. Its sails glowed faintly in the moonlight, though no lanterns burned. The hunters engaged, but their cannons misfired, ropes tangled, and strange mists rose from nowhere. Survivors claimed they heard voices crying out from the water, not of men drowning, but of men being dissected, their screams echoing from the deep. The Valiant never returned. The Carolina Hope limped back with half her crew raving mad. Only the Red Swan escaped, its captain swearing he had seen Thorne standing calmly on the ghostly ship's deck, his coat immaculate, his journal in hand. The last journal. In 1741, a violent hurricane struck Bermuda. Among the wreckage scattered along the beaches was a single waterproof case. Inside lay a journal bound in human skin. Its contents matched Thorne's handwriting. The entries grew increasingly unstable, half medical notes, half sermons. He wrote of breaking the final barrier between life and death. Of creating a vessel that need never perish. Most chilling of all was the final page, scrawled as if in a frenzy. Greater than, the 42 were only the beginning. They are within me now. Their voices guide me. Their flesh sustains me. I will not die. I will not die. I will not die. The journal was sealed away in London, where it remains hidden to this day. Legends of the Grey Patron. After that, Thorne's appearances grew rarer, shifting from records into folklore. Sailors whispered of a phantom ship off the Carolinas, crewed by pale men with surgeons' hands. Plantation workers spoke of a doctor who walked among the rice fields at night, examining the healthy, leaving the weak behind. In Charleston, mothers still warn their children, "Don't go out after dark, or the patron will take you for his experiments." Some modern historians dismiss these tales as superstition, a way for colonists to explain disease, raids, and disappearances. But others point to the uncanny medical discoveries that appeared in Europe decades ahead of their time. Discoveries that match Thorne's notes exactly. The final sightings. The last alleged sighting came in 1762, during the height of the 7 Years' War. A British warship reported encountering a vessel near Cuba. The captain described it as ancient but pristine, with sails that did not flutter though the wind was strong. A tall man in a faded naval coat stood on the deck, holding a book. He raised his hand in greeting, then vanished into mist. Some say Thorne was finally claimed by the sea. Others believe he achieved what he set out to do, cheat death itself. What we're left with. So who was Captain Ezekiel Thorne? A brilliant surgeon who lost his humanity in the pursuit of knowledge. A pirate who turned medicine into horror. Or something more, a figure who still walks among us, hidden by time, continuing his dark work. The truth may never be known. But one thing is certain. Wherever human ambition pushes too far, wherever knowledge is bought at the price of suffering, the shadow of the Grey Patron is never far behind. Movie camera final words. And that concludes our 10-part journey into one of the darkest legends of early America. The story of Ezekiel Thorne is not just about history, it's about the price of curiosity, the dangers of obsession, and the haunting truth that some knowledge should never be pursued. If you've followed this series all the way through, thank you. I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Thorne was a real man whose story was buried by history? Or was he a myth created to warn colonists about the dangers of science without morality? Drop your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this series, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. It helps keep these forgotten stories alive and brings more mystery lovers into our community. Because as long as we keep telling them, legends like Thorne's will never vanish into the dark.